We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening are not subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 30,000 subscribers, so please be that legend and help us get to that goal. It's free and does so much for us. We love each and every one of you.
It's wild how fast someone can go from "you're different from the others" to blocking your number. Like, one day you're picking out a playlist together, and the next you're tagging another dude at a rooftop bar while your dinner's still sitting on the table getting cold. But yeah, that was Jessica. Or at least the version of her I got. We met at a party that wasn't really supposed to be a party. It was one of those chill hangs that ends up with 30 people in a backyard and someone trying to freestyle over a Bluetooth speaker. I remember she was sitting on the edge of a fire pit bench with a hoodie that looked 3 sizes too big and a beer she never actually drank. She had this whole laid back, not trying too hard thing going on, and I was into it. We started talking about music, then food, and she said she hated restaurants that charged $20 for toast, and that the best dates were the ones where you didn't spend anything. I thought, finally, someone who gets it. Our first few dates were like that: late night walks, thrift stores, a taco truck she claimed was better than anything on Yelp. I started liking her more because it felt simple. She didn't seem like she was chasing anything, just enjoying stuff as it came. We hang at mine, make random pasta dishes. She'd show me means for an hour. The most expensive thing I did for her was probably an $18 candle she pointed at in a store once. And even then she said, "You didn't have to." It felt easy. But something started to feel a little off. Not dramatic, just little things. Like, she'd always talk about how she wasn't into material stuff, but she knew every high-end restaurant opening in the city. And whenever we went out somewhere nice, which was rare, she'd post a million stories. She never tagged me, just the place. It was like dating a tourist in her own city. I remember once we got sushi, and she asked the waiter to move the soy sauce dish, because the aesthetic's better without it. Who says that? Still, I didn't question it much. I figured maybe she just liked sharing things. A lot of people do. It wasn't until one night when I forgot my wallet that everything just fell apart. We were grabbing dinner at this Korean barbecue spot downtown. Not fancy, but not cheap either. Mid-range date spot. We'd been there once before, and she'd said she liked the vibe, so I figured it was chill. We sit down, order a few things, and when the food comes, I realize, crap, I left my wallet at home. I'd switched jackets and didn't double check. I laughed it off and told her, like, "Yo, I messed up. Can you cover this and I'll hit you back tonight?" She didn't say anything right away, just stared at me. And I'm talking full eye contact, zero expression, like I just ruined her birthday or something. She blinked a few times, looked down at her phone, and said she needed to go to the bathroom. 10 minutes go by, then 20. I text her. No response. I called her, straight to voicemail. And that's when I realized she wasn't coming back. I paid for the meal using Apple Pay on my phone. Shout out to technology. Sat there kind of stunned for a bit, then just went home. I wasn't angry at first, just confused. Like, what the hell just happened? Who ditches someone mid-dinner because of a forgotten wallet? Even if it was weird to her, how do you not just talk about it? That confusion lasted until I got home and opened Instagram. There she was, not just out, but dressed up, full face of makeup, smiling with a glass of champagne in her hand at this rooftop bar I'd heard about but never been to. Real fancy spot, all marble tables and skyline views. She was tagged at the location, and so was someone else. The guy she was with? A dude I actually knew from back in college. We weren't close, but I'd seen him on my feed a bunch because he just sold his startup a few months ago. Everyone was reposting the article. He made bank. And there he was, sitting across from her with his arm casually on the back of the seat, smiling like he'd just won something. At that point, it all clicked. All the "I hate luxury" stuff talk, the food trucks, the thrifted hoodies, it was an act. A carefully built character. The anti-gold digger gold digger. She made herself seem low maintenance so you'd never question her motives. But every time we went somewhere even slightly upscale, she treated it like an audition. Like she wanted someone out there to notice she belonged in that world. And I guess someone finally did. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I just unfollowed and let it go. What was I gonna say? "Hey, thanks for the trauma response to my empty pockets." Nah, I just kept my distance and watched it all unfold from the sidelines. A few weeks later, I started hearing stories from other people. friends of friends. One guy said she borrowed his car and never returned it until he threatened to go to the cops. Another said she ran up his credit card buying presents for her niece that turned out to be luxury skincare and heels. Every story was slightly different, but followed the same formula: get close, play chill, then bounce the second someone with more money showed up. It's almost funny now the way she managed it. She never asked for anything directly, never said, buy me this or take me here. She just knew how to plant the seed and let you think it was your idea. It was subtle, calculated, and honestly kind of genius in a twisted way. So, yeah, I learned something. Not some deep emotional lesson, just a practical one. If someone says they hate money but only shows up for it, don't ignore that. Watch how they move when things aren't going their way. That's where the truth is. As for Jessica, last I checked, she's still tagging restaurants and never tagging the guy she's with. Guess some patterns don't change. There's this idea people push all the time that love and business don't mix. And yeah, I used to think that was just something bitter people say after a bad breakup. Like, if you're both ambitious in building something, why wouldn't it be a power couple thing? Why wouldn't you want to grow together? That's what I thought when I started dating Brandon. We'd met through this entrepreneur mixer thing, kind of a casual event for small business owners to trade ideas and maybe collaborate. I just gotten my skincare line into its first local store, so I was feeling good. Brandon came up to me while I was standing by the drinks table, started asking me about the ingredients I used, the branding, all of it. He wasn't creepy about it either, which was rare. He just seemed genuinely interested. Said he ran an eco-friendly streetwear brand, and I'll be honest, he looked the part. Cool jacket, nice sneakers, chill vibe. We talked for like an hour, exchanged info, and that was it. We started hanging out more after that, texting a lot, then grabbing lunch between meetings. He'd send me podcasts to listen to and ask for my opinions. Told me I had a great mind for marketing, and that I was exactly the kind of person he needed to keep him grounded. The way he said it made me feel like we were already some kind of team, even before we really were, and that sounded good to me. I liked the idea of having someone in my corner who wasn't intimidated by my hustle. After a couple months, he started spending more time at my place. It just kind of happened. He said his apartment was being renovated, and honestly, it wasn't a big deal at first. I was working 12-hour days most of the time and didn't mind the company when I came home. Plus he cooked, actually knew what he was doing. So yeah, it felt like this easy kind of domestic thing that worked for both of us. Somewhere in the middle of all that, he started asking about my vendors. Not in a shady way. Just little things like who I got my jars from, who printed my labels, where I source my oils. I didn't think twice. I thought maybe he was just curious or looking for ideas for his own brand. I even introduced him to one of my vendors when they happened to be at the same event. I remember thinking this is cool, like we're helping each other grow. Then things got weird. One of my suppliers, the one who handled my packaging, randomly raised their minimum order amount. No warning, just an email that said updated terms and new price sheet. Another one who made my labels stop replying to me altogether. I was scrambling to get orders filled and had to rush new quotes from other vendors just to keep up with my online sales. It was chaos, and I couldn't figure out what changed. One night, Brandon was on his laptop, sitting on the couch while I was trying to fix a shipment issue on mine. I got up to grab water and passed behind him. And I don't know what made me look, but I saw my business name in one of his emails, bold in the subject line. I paused and asked him what that was about. He minimized it and said, "Oh, just giving someone advice. Don't worry about it." I tried to brush it off, but something felt off. So later, when he was in the shower, I checked my email on my phone and searched for any vendor names that had gone silent on me. I didn't find anything new from them directly, but one of them had forwarded an old message chain to the wrong address, and it ended up in my inbox. That's how I found it. The vendor had forwarded me a thread where Brandon was pitching his new company to them. He was using my contacts. Not only that, he was bad-mouthing me in the process, telling them I was unreliable, that my payments were late, that my brand wasn't sustainable. The language was so calculated. He wasn't trash-talking, he was seeing doubt. Saying things like, "She's got potential but lacks long-term vision," and "I hate to see your business tied up in a sinking ship." I felt sick, not just because he was trying to pooch my people, but because he'd done it so quietly. so intentionally, like he knew I wouldn't notice if it all happened slowly enough. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I needed to know how far it went. So I pretended everything was normal. I laughed at his jokes, watched Netflix with him, even let him cook us dinner like he always did. Then, when he left his laptop open again, I looked. I wasn't even sneaky about it. I opened his email and went to his sent folder. There were dozens of messages. My name was in at least half of them. He had full-on pitch decks using modified versions of my branding. He was basically building a mirror version of my company using the foundation I'd spent years building. That night, I packed a bag, went to my sister's place, and stayed there for 2 days. I didn't say a word to him, just left. During those 2 days, I emailed every single vendor he contacted and sent them screenshots. I told them what was happening and how he'd gotten their info. A couple of them were furious. One called me and said they had no idea he was connected to me. Another apologized for cutting ties and said they'd work with me again under new terms. When I came back home, he was gone. Left a note on the counter like this was some kind of movie. Said he didn't mean to hurt me and that business can get messy. That was literally what he wrote, like he forgot I wasn't just a business partner. I was the person who would let him sleep in my bed, eat my food, talk about our future. I never replied. He tried to reach out a few times, but I blocked him everywhere. I kept the screenshots though, just in case he tried to run the same game on someone else. I heard through a mutual connection that he started dating another girl who runs an online store. Candles or something. I wanted to warn her, but I didn't know how without sounding crazy. So I left it. People say keep your personal life separate from your business. I always thought that sounded cold. Now I get it. Not because love and work can't mix, but because not everyone who wants to build with you is actually there to build. Some people just want a shortcut. And if you're not watching closely, they'll build their empire on your ruins and call it ambition. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I needed to know how far it went. So I pretended everything was normal. I laughed at his jokes, watched Netflix with him, even let him cook us dinner like he always did. Then, when he left his laptop open again, I looked. I wasn't even sneaky about it. I opened his email and went to his sent folder. There were dozens of messages. My name was in at least half of them. He had full-on pitch decks using modified versions of my branding. He was basically building a mirror version of my company using the foundation I'd spent years building. That night, I packed a bag, went to my sister's place, and stayed there for 2 days. I didn't say a word to him, just left. During those 2 days, I emailed every single vendor he contacted and sent them screenshots. I told them what was happening and how he'd gotten their info. A couple of them were furious. One called me and said they had no idea he was connected to me. Another apologized for cutting ties and said they'd work with me again under new terms. When I came back home, he was gone. Left a note on the counter like this was some kind of movie. Said he didn't mean to hurt me and that business can get messy. That was literally what he wrote, like he forgot I wasn't just a business partner. I was the person who would let him sleep in my bed, eat my food, talk about our future. I never replied. He tried to reach out a few times, but I blocked him everywhere. I kept the screenshots though, just in case he tried to run the same game on someone else. I heard through a mutual connection that he started dating another girl who runs an online store. Candles or something. I wanted to warn her, but I didn't know how without sounding crazy. So I left it. People say keep your personal life separate from your business. I always thought that sounded cold. Now I get it. Not because love and work can't mix, but because not everyone who wants to build with you is actually there to build. Some people just want a shortcut. And if you're not watching closely, they'll build their empire on your ruins and call it ambition. It's funny how someone can be so confident, so sure of themselves, and still think they can get away with the most obvious scam. I should have caught on sooner, but I guess I was too blinded by the romance of it all. Tiffany had this way of making me feel like I was the only one that mattered in her world. But like most things that seemed too good to be true, I learned the hard way that it was all just an act. I met Tiffany through a mutual friend. She wasn't the typical kind of woman I usually went for. She wasn't into the whole Instagram model scene, didn't wear heavy makeup, and her fashion choices were always simple but stylish. She gave off this vibe of being independent and grounded, but there was something about her that made you want to do whatever you could to make her happy. She would tell stories about how she was living on her own, struggling to make ends meet while building a career in interior design. It was all very relatable, and honestly, I admired her for it. We started hanging out more often. The dates were never extravagant, mostly casual dinners or walking around the city. There was this one evening when we had a picnic in the park, and she brought this homemade salad that tasted so much better than I expected. She laughed and said, "I'm a simple girl, an aboliter." It just felt like a real connection. And I loved that she wasn't about flashy displays of wealth or materialistic nonsense. So when she mentioned moving into a new apartment and how she could use some help with the lease, I didn't think twice. She told me she found a place near the city center, a nice apartment that would be perfect for both of us. She even mentioned how it would be a great space for her to focus on her interior design work and how much she was looking forward to setting it all up. She asked me if I would co-sign on the lease with her. At first, I was a little hesitant. I didn't want to rush things, but she was persuasive. She said it would be temporary, just until her business took off, and she'd afford to handle it on her own. Plus, she said it would give us a chance to build something together. We could live in this beautiful shared space, and I could help her with the vision she had for her work. It didn't take long before I agreed. We signed the lease together. It felt like a step forward, like we were officially building a future. She promised me it would be a fresh start for both of us. Things were good for a while. We moved in, and the apartment quickly turned into a cozy space filled with plants, art pieces, and some of Tiffany's work, design ideas she'd been wanting to experiment with. But something started to feel off about a month after we moved in. I was always at work, and Tiffany had her own freelance projects, so we weren't home all the time, but there were moments when I started noticing little things that didn't add up. It started with the furniture. Tiffany had always talked about how minimalistic she wanted to be, but every time I came home, there were new items in the apartment. At first, I thought she was just picking up things here and there for the space, but then the items started getting more expensive. A velvet couch here, a designer coffee table there, and the occasional high-end lamp or rug. I didn't mind it at first. After all, she had said this was part of her work, making the apartment a true reflection of her design vision. I always thought I was too smart to fall for something like this. You hear the horror stories all the time. People getting scammed or taken advantage of by someone they trust, but it's never supposed to happen to you. I used to think that if someone tried to pull a fast one on me, I'd spot it right away. But that's the thing about trust. When you're in it, you don't always see the red flags until they're too big to ignore. I met Ethan at a conference for entrepreneurs. I was looking for ways to scale my tech firm, and he was doing something similar in the same space. We got talking, and right off the bat, he seemed like a dream. He was smart, charming, and he had this whole I admire hardworking women vibe that made me feel like I was seen for more than just my business. Like I wasn't just another girl in a male-dominated field. He made me feel like we were kindred spirits in this crazy startup world. We exchanged business cards, and then he invited me to grab coffee to talk shop more. At first, I wasn't interested in mixing business and pleasure, but the more we talked, the more I saw how aligned our ideas were. I couldn't deny the chemistry between us. We shared the same struggles and the same drive. He understood what it was like to be juggling multiple projects at once, trying to keep everything running smoothly. I felt like I could really trust him, both personally and professionally. So when he suggested that I bring him on board as a consultant for my tech company, I didn't hesitate. He had a ton of industry experience, and I thought, why not? We could collaborate, learn from each other, and take the business to the next level. He said he helped me refine my business strategy, improve my operations, and help with the back-end technical stuff. At that point, I was struggling to keep up with the rapid growth of my company, so the idea of having someone like him to help me out seemed like a godsend. He assured me that he would be fully invested in the business. "I want to see you succeed," he said over and over. "We're in this together." I should have known that was the first warning sign, because that's the exact thing someone says when they're trying to make you think you're a team, when in reality, you're just a stepping stone to whatever they're after. I started letting him into my business world, little by little. I shared my business plan with him, let him review my finances, and even gave him access to some of my company's accounts so he could help me with the technical side of things. The more I trusted him, the more I gave him free rein. He had such a way of making everything sound so logical and clear. He would talk about streamlining my processes, expanding my reach, and optimizing everything. It was impressive, but it was also a little too smooth. Like he had done this before. At first, things seemed to be going well. He made some small changes to the way I was running things, and I noticed improvements in efficiency. He introduced me to some potential investors, helped me negotiate some better deals, and even got me involved in a few new partnerships. I was feeling good. My company was growing, and Ethan was right there beside me, always offering support, always offering advice. I felt like I was finally getting the help I needed to take the business to the next level. But then slowly, things started to fall apart. I started noticing that Ethan was always busy, too busy to meet up in person, too busy to answer my calls. When he did show up, it was for short, disjointed meetings that never seemed to go anywhere. He would promise me updates on his progress, but I never saw any concrete results. Instead, I was left to pick up the slack on my own, scrambling to make the deals he promised come through. I tried not to overthink it at first. Maybe he was just swamped with other clients. Maybe he was working on something big behind the scenes. But I started getting more and more frustrated. My company's growth was stalling, and Ethan wasn't helping in the ways he said he would. He would tell me things like, "Don't worry, we're on track. Just trust the process." But I didn't feel like I could trust the process anymore. I felt like I was being strung along. Then one day, I made the mistake of leaving my laptop open while I went out for a meeting. When I came back, Ethan was gone, but I noticed that my email had been left open. I didn't mean to snoop, but I saw a thread with the subject line, "Next Steps." I opened it, and my heart sank as I started reading the conversation. It wasn't between Ethan and me, or even Ethan and one of my team members. It was between him and a rival tech company. They were talking about my company, the one he'd been hired to help. They were discussing pricing strategies, client lists, and project proposals that were identical to the work I've been doing. It wasn't just a couple of ideas he was passing along. He was practically handing them my business on a silver platter. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. How had I not seen this coming? Ethan had been using my company's confidential information to help a competitor. He had been siphoning off everything he could, clients, strategies, plans, and giving them to someone else. And I had been the one giving him all this access, thinking I was working with someone who had my best interests at heart. I couldn't believe it. How could someone I trusted so much do this? I thought we had a partnership. I thought he cared about the success of my company. But here he was, essentially selling me out to the highest bidder. I confronted him that same night. I didn't know what the hell was going on. He tried to play it cool, act like I was overreacting. He said I was misinterpreting the situation, that I didn't understand the bigger picture. But the truth was right in front of me. He was using my company to benefit himself, to build up the competition while I was left holding the bag. At that point, I realized I had been blind. I had trusted him completely, given him access to everything, and all he'd done was using to get ahead. I felt foolish, but more than that, I felt betrayed. I ended things with him that night. I cut off all communication, and I started the painful process of cleaning up the mess he left behind. I had to go through all the partnerships he had made on my behalf, backtrack the deals he had initiated, and reassure investors and clients that I was still in control of my company. It was a nightmare, but it was the only way to salvage what was left. The worst part, he never even apologized. He just moved on to his next target, I'm sure. As for me, I learned a hard lesson. Not everyone who acts like they're on your side is really there for you. Sometimes they're just trying to make a profit off of your success. Looking back, I realized I should have never let him in so completely. I should have kept a closer eye on things from the start. But at the end of the day, trust is something you give freely, and it's painful when someone takes advantage of it. You can't always see the betrayal coming, but when it hits, it hurts worse than you can imagine. I don't know what I was expecting when I met Kayla. She was an artist, struggling, or so she said. She had this charming way of speaking, this soft smile that made you believe her every word. I always had a soft spot for people with creative dreams, so when she told me she was having a hard time paying rent and trying to make it as an artist, I wanted to help. She seemed so genuine, so humble. But looking back now, I can't believe how easily I fell for it. Kayla and I met at a local art gallery. She was there with some friends, and I had overheard her talking about a project she was working on. Something about using recycled materials to create sculptures. I thought it was fascinating, so I struck out conversation with her. We hit it off immediately. She was funny, intelligent, and had this passion for her craft that was impossible to ignore. I loved the idea of supporting someone so dedicated to their work, and we started seeing each other more often. She told me that her work wasn't selling as much as she hoped, and that she was having a hard time getting the exposure she needed to make a living. I didn't mind. In fact, I admired her determination. We started spending a lot of time together. I would help her with supplies, picking up art materials, offering advice on how to market her work, and even introducing her to a few people in the industry who might help her get her foot in the door. She would always tell me how much she appreciated my support, and I genuinely felt good about helping her. It felt like I was making a difference in her life, and we talked about building a future together. It was easy to get lost in the idea of helping someone who seemed so deserving. After a while, I noticed that her financial situation wasn't as bad as she made it out to be. She casually mentioned how her landlord was understanding about her rent payments or how she was getting by on odd jobs here and there. I didn't press her on the details, but something about the way she talked about it didn't sit right. She always seemed to have enough money for the things she wanted: new art supplies, meals at nice restaurants, and even a couple of weekend getaways. But I didn't want to overthink it. After all, she was a struggling artist, right? She had only ends meet however she could. Still, something about the whole situation started feeling a little off, and I began to question the story she was telling me. It all came to a head one evening when we were out for dinner at a nice restaurant. I hadn't seen her in a couple of days because I had been busy with work, so when we finally got the chance to catch up, I was excited. But when I went to grab my wallet to pay the bill, I realized it wasn't in my bag. I started to panic a little. I always carried my wallet with me, but for some reason, it was nowhere to be found. I apologized to Kayla, explaining that I must have left it at home. I offered to call the restaurant the next day and pay over the phone, but she waved it off, telling me it wasn't a big deal. She said she'd take care of it. At first, I felt guilty, but then I figured it wasn't the worst thing in the world. I trusted her, after all. But when she handed me the receipt after paying, I couldn't help but notice the tip she left. It was ridiculously high, far higher than any amount I would have left for a simple dinner. I didn't say anything, but it made me wonder, why would she leave such a large tip if she was struggling to make ends meet? The next day, I got a call from my bank. They flagged some suspicious activity on my credit card. I hadn't used it in a couple of days, but apparently there were charges that I didn't recognize. Several online purchases for art supplies and a few deliveries to her address. The purchases had all been made in the last week. At first, I thought there had been some sort of mistake. Maybe it was a mix-up with another card. But when I checked the receipts, I realized that the items weren't just random supplies. They were high-end, premium materials, expensive tools and equipment, things that an artist struggling to pay rent probably wouldn't be able to afford. I confronted Kayla about the charges. She acted surprised at first, then quickly came up with an excuse. She said she had used my card once or twice to buy some supplies because she didn't have her own car at the moment. She assured me it was nothing to worry about and that she'd pay me back as soon as she could. But something didn't sit right with me. She had used my card without asking, and now she was pretending it was no big deal. I didn't want to accuse her of anything outright, so I let it go. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. Kayla's story about being broke didn't seem to match her lifestyle. She was always buying new things, eating out, going on spontaneous trips. It felt like I was the one supporting her, but she was acting like she had everything under control. I decided to dig a little deeper. I started asking around, talking to some of her friends and acquaintances who had known her longer. That's when I found out the truth. Kayla had a trust fund. She wasn't struggling at all. In fact, she had been living off her family's money for years. Her parents had cut her off after she lied about going to college, and they had stopped supporting her. But she had never told me that part. Instead, she had played the role of the struggling artist, hoping I would take pity on her and cover the costs of her lifestyle. It was a slap in the face. I had been helping her under the assumption that she was really in need, that she was just a struggling artist trying to make it. But the whole time, she had been lying to me. She had used my help to cover for the fact that her parents had cut her off, and she had continued to live this lavish life while pretending to be broke. When I confronted her about what I had found out, she didn't even seem shocked. She just shrugged it off, acting like it didn't matter. She told me that it was no big deal, that I shouldn't have looked into her personal finances. But I couldn't just let it go. I felt like I had been played, used, and manipulated. I ended things with her that night. I couldn't continue being with someone who was so deceitful. I had done so much for her, only to find out it was all a lie. And the worst part, she didn't even seem to care. She didn't apologize. She just acted like it was no big deal. I realized how easily I let her manipulate me. I wanted to believe in her and wanted to support her, and I let that cloud my judgment. But now I know better. Not everyone who says they're struggling is really struggling. Some people are just really good at pretending. And I learned the hard way that if someone is too good to be true, they probably are. It all started with a simple request, one that I never thought would spiral into the worst mistake I ever made. I met Tyler through a mutual friend at a party. He was charming, good-looking, and seemed like someone who had everything together. We got along well, and after a few weeks of hanging out, he started talking about how much he loved road trips. He'd always wanted to see more of the country, but his car was on its last legs, and it wasn't reliable enough for long drives. I didn't think much of it at first. He had been open about not having a lot of money, and I felt bad for him. I mean, who doesn't want to go on a spontaneous road trip to clear their head and see new places? So when he asked if I'd be willing to help him co-sign on a car loan for him, I didn't hesitate. He promised me that once he got back on his feet, he would pay me back. He said it would be a short-term thing, that he would use the car to visit me more often, and we could take some weekend trips together. The idea sounded good. I thought it was harmless. He was my friend, and I wanted to help. But looking back, I realized how naive I was. I signed the loan paperwork without much thought. It wasn't a huge deal to me. After all, we had been friends for a while, and I trusted him. Besides, he made it sound like it was just a temporary thing. He needed the car to travel for work, and once he got more established, he would take care of everything. He promised he would handle all the payments, and I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I wasn't even concerned about being on the hook for the loan because I was certain he would follow through. The car was nice, nothing too fancy, but it was a solid model, perfect for long drives. Tyler was thrilled when he finally got the keys. He sent me a text thanking me profusely for helping him out. "You're a lifesaver," he wrote. "I promise I won't let you down." At first, things went exactly as he had promised. He came to visit me a couple of times, and we took some short trips around the area. He always seemed so grateful, and I felt good about my decision. I thought we were doing something fun and meaningful. But then slowly, things started to change. He began canceling plans more often, saying he was busy with work. I didn't think too much of it at first. Everyone has busy days, right? But over time, the cancellations became more frequent, and the excuses more elaborate. I didn't want to confront him about it. I didn't want to be that person who nags their friends. But then one day, I ran into him while I was out shopping. He was with another woman, and they were both laughing and loading bags into the car, the same car that I had co-signed for. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I watched as they drove off together, and for a split second, I felt a pit in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. The next few days, I didn't hear from him, not even a text. I started to wonder if I had made a huge mistake. It wasn't like Tyler to just disappear, especially after everything I had done for him. Eventually, I had the courage to call him. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. "Hey, Tyler, what's going on? I haven't heard from you in a while," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, even though I was worried. "Hey, sorry about that," he said, sounding distracted. "I've been really busy with stuff. Work, you know." I didn't believe him. I'd seen him just a few days ago, and he didn't seem that busy. "Yeah, I get it. But I saw you the other day with someone else. You guys looked like you were out shopping or something." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, yeah, it's nothing. Just some girl I've been seeing. We're just friends," he said almost too quickly. I didn't say anything at first. I was trying to process it all. He'd been seeing someone else, and he hadn't mentioned it to me. But it wasn't just that. It was the fact that he had been using the car I helped him get for these outings. Why hadn't he told me about this new girl? And why had he been avoiding me for weeks? "I don't know, Tyler," I finally said, my voice shaking a little. "This isn't what you promised. You asked me to co-sign on that car because you said you needed it for work and to visit me more often. But it seems like you're using it for something else." There was another pause. "Look, I'm sorry if it's been weird, but I've just been, figuring some things out." "Figuring what out?" I asked, my frustration growing. "You promised me you would make the payments, and now I'm seeing you out there with some other girl using the car. I feel like I've been taken for a ride." "Listen, don't make this a big deal," he replied, his tone suddenly defensive. "It's just a car. I'm paying for it and I'll pay you back. Just give me some time, all right?" I could feel my anger rising, but I tried to stay calm. "It's not just the car, Tyler. It's everything. You've been lying to me, and now you're acting like it's no big deal." He didn't answer me right away. And when he finally spoke again, His voice was cold. "You're overreacting. You're just mad because you're not getting the attention you want. It's just a car, okay? Stop being so dramatic." And just like that, I knew. I knew I had been played. He wasn't interested in me or the promises he'd made. He had used me to get what he wanted, and now he was discarding me like I didn't matter. The truth was, I had been nothing more than a temporary solution to his problem. A few days later, I got a text from him that said he was taking the car on a road trip with his new girlfriend. He didn't even bother asking if I was okay with it. He just assumed I'd be fine with him taking my car that I co-signed for and paying nothing toward it. I felt like a fool. I had let him use me, and now I was stuck. I had to make a decision. I went to the bank and started the process of getting out of the loan. I didn't care if I took a hit on my credit. I was done with him. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. I never heard from him again after that. He blocked me on social media, and I eventually found out he had moved in with a girl he'd been seeing. It took me a while to process everything. I trusted him, helped him when he asked, and in the end, I was left holding the bag. He had used me, and now I was stuck dealing with the consequences. I realized that sometimes, no matter how much you want to help someone, they can still take advantage of you. And sometimes you don't see it coming until it's too late. I had always thought Amanda was different from the rest. She wasn't flashy, didn't care much for designer brands, and always acted like money didn't matter to her. It was refreshing, honestly. It felt like she was genuinely interested in me and us, rather than what I could do for her financially. We met at a mutual friend's party, and after a few weeks of casual texting and hanging out, we started to date. It was one of those easy relationships where everything just clicked. Or so I thought. After a couple of months, Amanda and I started talking about the future. We had some serious conversations about where we saw ourselves in a year or two, the things we wanted to do together, the life we built. I wasn't in a rush to get into anything too serious, but I liked her. I felt comfortable with her, and that's not something I experienced a lot. When she suggested that we move in together, I was excited. It felt natural. Plus, she found this incredible place, a luxury condo that was far too nice for a couple like us, but it seemed like a dream. She sold it to me as a joint decision. We'd get the place, and everything would be ours. But the catch was that we both have to sign the lease. She said it would be better if we both signed, especially since the rent was a little higher than what I was used to paying. But I was fine with it. I had a decent job, and everything seemed great. Amanda assured me that we'd manage the expenses together. When we moved in, everything felt perfect. We spent weekends decorating, getting to know the neighborhood, and enjoying the luxury that came with living in such a nice building. But there were some small things I started to notice. Amanda had a lot of family visits. I didn't think too much of it, because she always said it was just a quick drop-by, nothing serious. But then, a week or two after we moved in, I noticed her sister, Jessica, was hanging around a lot more than expected. One evening, I came home from a work trip, and as soon as I walked in the door, I felt like something was off. The apartment was unusually quiet. I looked around the living room and noticed new furniture, really nice furniture. A new couch, a huge flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, and a designer coffee table. I was confused. We had discussed buying a few things for the apartment, but nothing like this. I had no idea where this stuff had come from, and I didn't remember us making any purchases recently. When I asked Amanda about it, she just shrugged it off casually. "Oh, don't worry. I just thought it would be nice to get some things for the place while you were away. I used your card to pay for it." I froze. My mind started racing. Use my card. I repeated, not sure if I was hearing her correctly, without asking me. Amanda looked at me like it was no big deal. "I thought it would be fine. You're always telling me to relax, enjoy life. It's just furniture, babe. I'll pay you back once we settle down more. Don't stress about it." I didn't know what to say. We hadn't talked about using my credit card for purchases, let alone this kind of thing. But I let it slide. It wasn't worth a huge fight. I figured I'd just keep an eye on things and make sure nothing else like that happened. Then the following week, things started to escalate. One evening after getting home late, I found Amanda and Jessica sitting on the couch, talking and laughing. They seemed unusually close, and there was something strange in the air. Jessica, who had always been nice to me, suddenly acted more familiar than I was comfortable with. When I asked Amanda where she'd been, she said she'd been helping Jessica out with some things. I didn't press her further. It wasn't until a few days later that I realized the full extent of what had been going on. I came back from a work trip, and this time something felt different, almost like a pit in my stomach. I noticed that a few of my things were gone. Some personal items, nothing too expensive, but definitely things I valued. At first, I thought maybe I just misplaced them, but then it hit me. The wallet was missing. I started searching the apartment, turning over cushions and drawers, but it was nowhere to be found. Hennick said. I immediately called Amanda. She sounded calm when she answered, like nothing was wrong, but I could tell something was off. She told me she hadn't seen my wallet and I should check again. Maybe I had just left it somewhere. I didn't believe her. Something didn't add up. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I checked the transactions on my credit card. My stomach dropped as I saw a series of charges that I didn't recognize. Expensive furniture from a store I didn't remember purchasing from, multiple takeout orders, and a few other random charges. But the biggest shock came when I found a charge for a hotel booking in a nearby city, a city I knew Amanda had never mentioned. I confronted her that night. Amanda, what is this? You've been using my credit card without telling me. And now I find a hotel booking. What's going on? She seemed unfazed. It's not what you think, babe. I just used the card for some things. We were gonna furnish the place anyway, and Jessica needed help too. As for the hotel, that's just something I booked with some friends. It's no big deal. But I was beyond frustrated. No big deal. You've been using my card without my permission, buying all this expensive stuff. And now you're telling me it's nothing. She looked at me blankly. It's just furniture. And you know Jessica's been going through a tough time. She needed a place to stay for a while. We thought it'd be okay for her to crash here for a bit. She's family after all. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just a couple of things here and there. It was my credit, my money, and now they were living in the condo I had signed the lease for as if it was their own. My own family wasn't even staying with me. Her sister and her boyfriend were practically living there full-time without any real discussion. I asked Amanda, how long has she been living here without telling me? Why didn't you mention any of this? Her response was as nonchalant as ever. It's just temporary. We've been trying to help her out. You shouldn't be so upset. It's just until she gets back on her feet. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been manipulated. I had signed the lease with her thinking it was a shared commitment, a partnership. But Amanda wasn't acting like a partner. She was using me to help her family, using my credit to pay for things she didn't ask me about. And the worst part was how she kept brushing off my concerns like they didn't matter. After a few days of letting everything sink in, I knew I couldn't continue like this. It wasn't just about the money or the apartment anymore. It was about trust. And I had lost that trust completely. I started making plans to move out. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was being taken advantage of anymore. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner, for not questioning her actions earlier. When I finally told Amanda I was leaving, she seemed almost surprised. You can't be serious, she said, as if it was all some big misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew she was just trying to save face. I'd caught her in a lie, and now it was too late to fix things. It was hard. It was painful because I had really believed in what we were building. But I couldn't ignore the reality any longer. I wasn't just a partner in this relationship. I was a pawn in a game she had been playing the entire time. I wasn't going to let her use me anymore. It was hard to ignore Nick when he first came into my life. He was everything I wasn't expecting, a bit of a wild card, but charismatic in a way that made you feel like he was a one person who truly understood you. We met through some mutual friends, and it didn't take long for him to convince me that we were on the same wavelength. He had these grand ideas. His startup was going to change the world, or at least that's what he kept saying. I was impressed, or at least I wanted to be. I mean, who wouldn't want to help someone with such big dreams, especially when they talk about it with such passion? Nick wasn't just your typical guy trying to start a business. He had a story. He claimed he had been working on this app for years, an innovative tool that would revolutionize the way people interact with technology. He talked about how he'd been building the idea from the ground up, how his team was small but efficient, how they were just waiting for the right investor to come along and give them the push they needed. I wasn't an idiot. I knew the startup world was a gamble. But the more Nick talked, the more I found myself rooting for him. He didn't have investors yet, and I guess that's where I came in. He told me he was so close to getting his funding, but he needed just a little more to push everything through. He said he just needed a small amount to get things rolling, Something to show his potential investors that he had skin in the game, that he wasn't just another guy talking big. I'm not exactly loaded, but I had a decent amount saved up and felt confident in my financial situation. So after a lot of convincing, I agreed to help him out. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Nick was a friend, and I wanted to support his ambition. He was smart, driven, and he made me believe that I was investing in something that would eventually pay off. He even had a professional-looking website, a slick pitch deck, and his social media presence was enough to make it seem like things were moving forward. It looked legit. Maybe it was just a little too polished, but I brushed that off. I didn't expect the money I gave him to instantly transform into success. I was realistic. Everyone knows startups are a long shot. But what really bothered me was how little he seemed to actually know about the business he was trying to build. Sure, he was good at talking the talk, but when it came to real, actionable steps, he couldn't tell me a thing. The more I dug into the details, the more I noticed inconsistencies. He'd give me vague answers when I asked about his progress or how the funds were being spent. There was always an excuse. It's in the early stages, I'm waiting on a meeting, or the development is behind schedule, but we're getting there. Every time I asked to see updates, he promised they were coming soon. But the red flags really started popping up when I began to dig into his business dealings. Something didn't sit right with me, so I decided to do a little background check. I know, I should have done it earlier, but I wanted to believe in him. The more I looked, the more I found myself questioning everything. First, I tried to look up the investors he was supposedly in talks with. Nothing. No trace of any real meetings or any kind of partnership beyond his vague mentions of a few key players. I couldn't find any of these so-called investors anywhere online, and when I pressed him about it, he'd just tell me it was all confidential or that things were still in the works. And then there was the app, the thing he was supposedly building. I asked him to show me more, get into the details of the platform, the app's features, its capabilities. But whenever I asked for specifics, Nick would shift the conversation, hitting me broad ideas about future capabilities or plans for expansion. I even tried searching for his app online, and lo and behold, there was no trace of it. No website, no beta, no landing page, nothing. Still, I held on to hope. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he just wasn't as organized as he should have been. But my gut told me that something wasn't adding up. I decided to push a little harder, so I asked him for more transparency. I asked to see some kind of proof that the money I'd given him was being put into the business, or at least being used to develop the app. His response, more vague promises. It's all in the works, he said again, but this time I could tell something had changed. There was an unease in his voice, like he didn't know how to keep the lie going. That's when I stumbled onto something I'll never forget. I was going through my personal email one night, and I saw a forwarded message from one of the vendors Nick had been in contact with. It was from a third-party service that he'd been trying to get to develop the app for him. The subject line caught my attention. No progress, no commitment. I opened it and my heart sank. It was an email from the vendor to Nick, asking why they hadn't received the promised funds. The email mentioned that they had been waiting for over a month and had been ghosted by Nick. The tone was one of frustration, almost like they had been strung along for months with no results. I was furious. How could he do this to me? To everyone he had worked with? I thought we were friends, and here he was essentially taking my money and not even bothering to develop anything substantial. This wasn't a startup. This was a scam. I immediately called him, but he didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. I sent a text, asking him to meet up and talk. I had to confront him. It took him hours to get back to me, and when he finally did, his excuse was that he had been super busy with meetings and dealing with his team. The nerve. I told him I knew everything, the email, the missing funds, the lack of progress on the app. His response was a pitiful attempt at damage control. He told me the vendor was being difficult, the project was almost there, and that he was just waiting for a few things to fall into place. But I could see through it. I didn't need more excuses. I didn't need him to tell me a story that didn't add up. I told him I wanted my money back, and I was done. He started apologizing, but I wasn't having it. I had been fooled, and I wasn't going to let him take advantage of me any longer. I blocked him on everything and started doing everything I could to warn others. Looking back, I can't believe I let it go on as long as I did. The signs were there, how he avoided specifics, how he always had an excuse for why nothing was happening. I let myself believe in the dream he sold me, and in the end, I was just another person who got caught up in a story that was too good to be true. Now, I make sure to do my research before handing over any money. I trust my instincts a whole lot more than I did before. Nick was a wake-up call, and it's one I won't ever forget. It all started when Hannah and I first met at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was the type of person who seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Warm smile, infectious laugh, and those eyes that looked like they knew everything about you before you spoke a word. She had this way of making me feel special, like I was the only one in the room that mattered. I couldn't help but fall for her charm. We quickly became inseparable. There were long texts in the middle of the night, late night talks about life, and plans for the future that felt real and tangible. I was head over heels in love, and it seemed like she felt the same. Everything she said lined up perfectly with what I imagined my future to be. She talked about family commitment and how she wanted to build a life with someone who had the same values. In a way, she was everything I thought I wanted. But as time went on, there was one thing she kept saying that always made me pause. I want to make sure everything is perfect before we take the next step. At first, I thought it was cute. She was cautious, thoughtful. But the more I heard it, the more I started to feel like something was off. There was always a delay, always a reason to hold back. Every time we talked about our future, it was as if there was something she wasn't telling me, a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. I never questioned it too much because, well, I was in love, and love makes you ignore the small stuff. But the cracks started showing after about 6 months. One evening, as we were laying in bed, she started talking about her past relationships. She was open about it, even a little too open, but she told me one thing that made my blood run cold. She said that she wasn't entirely sure about her ex. They had a pretty complicated history, and she'd been through a lot of emotional trauma, which I understood. But then she dropped something that made me feel uncomfortable. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not repeating my mistakes. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, relationships are complicated, and everyone has baggage. I assured her that was different, that I was ready to move forward with her. But soon enough, the signs of trouble started to appear. One day, I was going through my usual routine of checking emails and texts when I noticed a few strange messages popping up on her phone. Hannah had always been protective of her phone, so I thought nothing of it at first. But this time, there were a lot of incoming messages from an unknown number. I felt an uncomfortable sensation in my gut, but ignored it. That is, until one evening when we were out to dinner, and I caught her texting under the table, her screen lighting up with a string of messages that didn't seem like they were meant for me. The whole thing felt off. I tried to let it go, but my curiosity got the better of me. The next day, I asked her about it casually. At first, she brushed it off, saying it was nothing important. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started noticing little things. Her phone was always locked when I was around. She was more distant. And whenever I brought up the future, she would quickly change the subject. Then a week later, things took a bizarre turn. I was at her apartment, lounging on the couch when I saw her phone slip off the coffee table. Without thinking, I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was a message for a name I didn't recognize. But what caught my eye was the message itself. It said, "I'm sorry it's come to this, but I can't keep pretending. I'm doing what I have to do." It sent a wave of panic through me. Who was she talking to? Why was she apologizing? My heart raced as I felt my stomach drop. I had to know what was going on. I couldn't take any more. I needed answers. That evening when we were alone, I confronted her. She sat there, her face pale, her eyes avoiding mine. At first, she denied everything, claiming it was nothing. Just an old friend she had been talking to about some personal stuff. But I wasn't buying it. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't let it go. Finally, she broke down and admitted it. The messages weren't from some old friend. They were from her ex, and it wasn't just casual contact either. She had been secretly meeting up with him behind my back. She told me she had never really gotten over him, that their breakup had left her emotionally scared, and she couldn't move forward with me because of that. She said she didn't want to hurt me, but it was too late. I felt completely betrayed. But that wasn't even the worst part. No, the worst part came when I started putting the pieces together. Hannah wasn't just emotionally torn between me and her ex. There was more to it than that. As I dug deeper into the situation, I discovered that she had been seeing her ex regularly, lying to me about where she was and who she was with. The text messages I saw were just the tip of the iceberg. She had been sneaking around for months, building a case with her ex that they could get back together. She had kept me around because I was the perfect distraction, the perfect person to keep things looking normal on the outside. But the worst part, she was using me to make herself look stable, to create a sense of normalcy while she kept her secret life with her ex. She told me that she wanted to have the perfect relationship, but in reality, she was lying to both of us. I wasn't the first person to fall for it. She'd been doing the same thing to other guys, stringing them along while keeping her ex on the back burner. I was furious. How could she do this? How could I have been so blind? The whole time she had been playing both sides, pretending to be committed to me while holding on to someone she hadn't really let go of. I ended things with her right then and there. I couldn't trust her anymore, and the betrayal was too much to ignore. But the damage had been done. The emotional scars she left behind were deep, and I was left picking up the pieces. I couldn't shake the feeling of being used, of being nothing more than a pawn in her game. Afterward, I found out that she'd done the same thing to another guy before me, another man who had fallen for her charm, just like I had. She would use them, make them feel like they were the one, and when it suited her, she tossed them aside without a second thought. The more I learned about her, the more I realized how much of a pattern it was. The whole thing still stings when I think about it. It's a hard lesson learned, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never be blinded by someone's charm again. The red flags were there from the start, and I ignored them because I wanted to believe the best in her. Now I know better. I met Chris during a summer trip with some friends. We were on a hiking trail, nothing too serious, just a weekend getaway to unwind. He was the kind of guy who seemed like he had it all figured out. He was charismatic, funny, and had a way of making everyone feel comfortable. When we first talked, it was casual, a little small talk about the trail, the weather, and then he started opening up about his life. He mentioned he was working on his dream business and that he had some big plans for the future. Honestly, he seemed pretty impressive. I didn't think too much about it at first. He was a few years older than me, and I liked the idea of learning from someone who seemed to have more life experience. Over the course of the weekend, we hit it off. There was something about his energy that made me want to spend more time with him, and it didn't take long before we started dating. At first, everything was perfect. Chris had a great job, and he told me about all of his entrepreneurial ventures. He seemed genuinely interested in my own goals and ambitions. We would talk for hours, and I loved how supportive he was. He encouraged me to pursue my passions and talked about how important it was to invest in yourself. But then came the problem. It started out small, a casual conversation about his student loans. Chris explained that he was still paying them off, and because of his high debt, he couldn't really focus on a serious relationship until things were sorted. It seemed like a reasonable thing to me. I mean, debt is a burden, and he was trying to handle it responsibly. But as time passed, the talk about money started creeping into our conversations more and more. I remember one evening we were out having dinner at this nice restaurant he had picked. It wasn't exactly cheap, but I didn't mind. We were enjoying ourselves, laughing and talking about everything under the sun until the check came. Chris hesitated. I noticed he looked at the bill for a moment longer than necessary. Then he gave me this awkward smile and said, "Hey, would you mind covering this one? I'm really tight on cash right now with the loans and all." Now, I wasn't some tight-fisted person, and I understood the situation. So I didn't think twice. I paid for the dinner, hoping that maybe it was just a one-time thing. But as time went on, it wasn't a one-time thing. It became a pattern. Every time we went out, he would find a way to dodge paying. At first, it was subtle. I forgot my wallet, or I don't have enough cash on me. I didn't mind so much, but then it started to feel like I was the one always picking up the tab. There were even times when we'd split a meal, and he asked me to cover his portion, claiming that he was waiting for his paycheck. I wasn't complaining about helping him out at first. I wanted to support him, especially since he seemed like a genuinely good guy trying to get back on his feet. But after a while, it became clear that something wasn't adding up. Chris kept telling me about his dreams of starting his own business, but every time I asked him about it, he changed the subject or tell me that he needed more time to work things out. It was always soon or next month, but next month never came. The breaking point came when he started asking me for bigger things. One night we were talking about our future, and Chris told me how much he wanted to get his own place but couldn't afford a down payment because of his student loans. He asked if I could help him out, and at first I thought it was a bit forward, but he seemed desperate. "I really need someone to help me get started," he said. "It's just a few $1,000s, and I'll pay you back as soon as I get a better job. It felt off, but I was too caught up in the moment. I liked him, and I wanted to believe in his vision. So I agreed to lend him the money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough that I had to dip into my savings. I told myself it would be okay, that he'd pay me back, and we'd be able to move forward together. But then things started to get worse. A few weeks later, I noticed he was acting distant. He was still calling and texting, but it wasn't the same. He was always busy, always working on his business or dealing with stuff. When we did meet up, there was this weird energy between us. He wasn't the same Chris I had fallen for. He didn't talk about his dreams anymore or of his plans for the future. It was like all that ambition had disappeared. It was then that I started looking into things more closely. I checked my bank account and realized that Chris hadn't even made a dent in paying me back. The few times I'd asked him about it, he'd give me excuses. I'll have the money next week, or I'm waiting for this big deal to come through. I was starting to get frustrated, but I didn't want to make it a big issue. I liked him and I trusted him. Maybe he was just going through a rough patch. That's when I found out the truth. It wasn't a huge revelation, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was scrolling through social media one afternoon when I stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend. The post was a picture of Chris, but what made me stop scrolling was the caption. Celebrating my new job with Chris. Finally landed that corporate position. #new beginnings. Now, up until that point, Chris had told me he was still looking for a steady job to help pay off his loans. He had mentioned interviews, but nothing concrete. Yet here he was being congratulated on landing a new job, a corporate position no less. I felt betrayed, but I wasn't sure what to do with the information. So I called him. He didn't answer. That's when things started to click into place. He had been lying to me about everything. The loans? A lie. His business ventures? Just smoke and mirrors. The truth was he wasn't struggling at all. He had just been using me. Using my money to cover his own debts. Using my kindness to keep things going. And it hit me all at once. I wasn't the partner he wanted. I was just an ATM. A way to make his life easier without him having to do the work. When I confronted him, he tried to downplay it, acting like he didn't understand why I was upset. But the excuses didn't work anymore. I ended things right there, telling him that I wasn't going to be part of this scam any longer. I found out later that Chris wasn't just doing this to me. There were other women, other people who had fallen for his lies. He had a whole network, convincing people to lend him money and help him out, promising them he'd pay them back once his business took off, once he landed the perfect job. But it was all a game. He was just using people to fund his own lifestyle, all while pretending to be a broke, ambitious entrepreneur. It took me a long time to process everything. It wasn't just about the money. It was about how easily I had been manipulated, how I had ignored the signs because I wanted to believe in the person I thought he was. But in the end, Chris wasn't the man I had fallen for. He was a fraud, someone who saw me as a stepping stone, a temporary fix to his problems. I learned a tough lesson that day. Sometimes the people you trust the most can be the ones who take the most from you. I first met Laura at a mutual friend's birthday party. We'd known of each other through social circles, but never really interacted much until that night. Laura was charming in a way that drew people to her instantly. She was fun, confident, and had a presence that made it impossible not to be around her. Her smile was warm and her laugh infectious. I didn't expect it at first, but by the end of the night, I found myself gravitating toward her more and more. It wasn't just her energy, it was the way she listened. She seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and I appreciated that. After a couple of weeks of chatting, we decided to go out for coffee one afternoon. It started off casual, just talking about our lives and what we were up to. But the more we talked, the more I found myself enjoying her company. We clicked, and soon after, we started dating. It was easy to get lost in the fantasy of it all. We shared a lot of common interests, and she was always full of excitement about life, which made everything feel effortless. A few months in, things started to take a different turn. Laura would talk about how her business was struggling and how hard things were for her financially. She was in the middle of trying to get a small online shop off the ground, and as she explained her situation to me, I couldn't help but feel a little concerned. She was working hard, she said, but it just wasn't enough. She'd mentioned how her business expenses were piling up and how stressful it was not having enough money to cover everything. I could see how much it was weighing on her, and I felt bad. I've always been someone who wants to help others when they're in need. So when she brought up the idea of a small loan, I didn't think twice about it. It was only a couple of $1,000s, and she promised she'd pay me back once her shop took off. She explained that the money would go towards inventory and marketing costs, things she couldn't afford on her own. I wasn't exactly rolling in money, but I had enough to spare. Plus, I trusted her. She'd never given me a reason to doubt her. We had a strong connection, and I believed in her vision. So I helped her out. The first few weeks after I gave her the money were fine. We continued to see each other regularly, and I didn't think much of it. She'd keep me updated about her business, showing me how she was investing the loan into better products and expanding her inventory. I was glad to see that she was putting the money to good use, or so I thought. But after a while, things started to feel off. Laura seemed more distant than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She wasn't as enthusiastic about her business anymore, and she seemed increasingly stressed out. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard to ignore the little inconsistencies that were starting to show up. For example, when I asked her how her business was doing, she'd brush it off with vague answers or claim she was too busy to talk about it. I started wondering if she was having a hard time with the loan I gave her, but I didn't want to push too hard. After all, she had promised to pay me back, and I trusted her to do so when she could. Still, the situation didn't feel quite right. I've been paying attention to the way she talked about her business. She never really seemed to have any concrete plans for growth. It was all just someday or eventually. A month passed, then two. And in that time, things started to shift. Laura became even more evasive, always too busy to meet up or constantly rescheduling our plans. She would cancel at the last minute, claiming she was caught up with work or dealing with personal issues. It wasn't until the third month that I finally decided to confront her about the loan. When I asked her how things were going with the money, she hesitated. Her face turned red, and she started fumbling with her phone. "I've been having some issues with the business," she said. "It's been slow, and I had to focus on other things for now." She quickly changed the subject, trying to make it seem like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell that something was off. That's when I decided to do a little digging. I wasn't a private investigator by any means, but I knew how to use the internet. I started looking into Laura's business online. I searched for her website, the products she claimed to be selling, and the social media pages she had linked to her shop. To my surprise, I couldn't find anything about her business. There were no updates on her website, and her social media had gone completely quiet. I was confused. It wasn't just a business that didn't add up. It was the money, too. She had been asking for a loan, but when I checked her bank account details for the transaction, something seemed odd. There was a large amount of money that went into her account a few weeks after I gave her the loan, but it didn't match any business expenses. I dug deeper and found something even more shocking. There were large withdrawals for things like high-end clothing, expensive dinners, and trips. That's when it hit me. Laura wasn't struggling to keep her business afloat. She had been lying to me the entire time. Instead of investing the loan in her business, she was using it to fund her lifestyle. She had used my money to cover her personal expenses, pretending like it was going to her shop. When I confronted her, she tried to deny it. But I had all the evidence I needed. She was caught red-handed. Her face turned pale when she saw that I had all the details from her bank account and social media pages. I was furious, but at the same time I felt betrayed. I had believed her every word. She had played on my trust, using my kindness to live a life she couldn't afford. Laura apologized profusely, claiming she didn't know how she had gotten so caught up in everything. She said she had tried to keep up appearances for me, but deep down she knew she had messed up. She promised that she would pay me back, but at that point I couldn't believe anything she said. The money was gone, and so was any trust I had in her. The breakup was inevitable. I couldn't keep dating someone who had lied to me so much, especially about something as serious as money. What hurt the most wasn't losing the money. It was the realization that I had been manipulated and used by someone I had genuinely cared for. It felt like my kindness had been taken advantage of, and it stung more than I could have imagined. I learned that not everyone who seems like they have their life together really does. Laura wasn't the person I thought she was, and while I can't get back the money I lost, I can at least move on with the knowledge that I won't be so easily duped again. I met Zach through mutual friends at a barbecue. He was charming, good-looking, and seemed to have everything going for him. It was the kind of meeting where you just hit it off instantly. We talked about music, movies, to travel, just your standard get-to-know-each-other stuff. Zach was charismatic, and I could tell people liked being around him. He wasn't the type to stay in the background. He had this magnetic energy that pulled people in. A couple of weeks later, we ended up going on our first date. It was nothing fancy, just a casual dinner at a local restaurant, but it felt different from the start. He was a great conversationalist, and I loved how easy it was to talk to him. The chemistry between us was undeniable. After a few more dates, we started hanging out more, and it didn't take long for us to become pretty serious. Zach and I were at that stage in the relationship where you start to talk about bigger things, like the future, living situations, and plans. He mentioned that he was between jobs and was looking for something more stable. I didn't think much of it. After all, we were both still in our 20s, and not everyone has their career figured out by then. I had my own career to focus on, and I didn't mind the idea of supporting him through a tough patch. At first, everything seemed perfect. We spent a lot of time together, laughing, exploring the city, and just enjoying each other's company. But then, one day, Zach asked me for a favor. He wanted to know if I would help him co-sign on a car loan. It wasn't a huge loan, just enough to buy a decent car for himself. Zach explained that his credit wasn't great because of some past financial mistakes, and he just needed someone with better credit to co-sign. Now, I wasn't rolling in money, but I had good credit. I had always been careful with my finances, and I saw co-signing as something I could do to help him out. Zach promised me that he would pay the loan on his own, that it was just a formality, and that he'd take care of the payments. He even assured me it would help his credit score and make him more financially stable in the long run. He was sincere, or at least he seemed to be. So I agreed. I didn't think twice about it. It seemed like a small gesture to help him get back on his feet. At the time, I trusted him. A few days later, I signed the paperwork, and Zach drove off in his new car. He was ecstatic, thanking me repeatedly for helping him out. I felt good about it, like I had done something nice for someone I cared about. The first few months went by without a hitch. Zach was making the payments on time, and he was genuinely appreciative. We continued to date, and everything seemed fine. But then things started to change. Zach began pulling away, becoming distant. He wasn't as communicative as he used to be, and when we did talk, he always seemed distracted. At first, I thought maybe he was just stressed from work or other things going on in his life, but as time went on, it became harder to ignore the signs. He was avoiding me. He'd cancel plans last minute, claiming he had other things to take care of. When we did hang out, he'd seem distant and not really present. He stopped making an effort to talk to me about anything other than superficial stuff. It was like it wasn't a priority anymore, and that bothered me. But still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I kept telling myself maybe it was just a phase. Then one day I checked my bank account and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There was a payment for the car loan that I hadn't seen come through before. I'd been checking the account regularly, and I knew when the payments were due. But this one was bigger than normal. My first thought was that maybe there had been an error, so I called the bank to ask about it. That's when I found out something that made my stomach drop. The payment had been made from my account, not his. I immediately tried to contact Zach, but he wasn't answering my calls or texts. The bank told me that the payment had been automatically withdrawn from my account because the payment had been missed on his end. And because I was a co-signer, the responsibility fell to me. I felt sick. How could he do this? How could he let this happen without even telling me? The next time I saw Zach, I confronted him about it. He seemed almost surprised that I was upset. He brushed it off like it was no big deal, saying he was just a little behind on the payments and that he would catch up soon. But I was furious. Not only had he failed to pay the loan, but he'd also taken no responsibility for it. And then, to make matters worse, he acted like it wasn't even a big deal. I pushed harder, demanding to know why he hadn't told me about the missed payment and why he hadn't made an effort to catch up. That's when he admitted that he hadn't been able to make the payments because he was using the money for other things he didn't want me to know about. It turns out Zach wasn't struggling financially like he had claimed. He had been living well above his means, going on trips, buying expensive clothes, and living a lifestyle that he couldn't afford, all while I was the one paying for his car loan. When I asked him what exactly he had been spending the money on, he tried to downplay it, saying it was just a few things here and there. But I knew better. He had been playing me for a fool, using my good credit to finance a lifestyle that didn't match his reality. He wasn't between jobs, as he had told me. He was just irresponsible with his money. The worst part was how he tried to make me feel guilty for being upset. He told me that I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal, and that I should just trust him to fix it. He said it was only a temporary setback and that he would make it right, but I couldn't trust him anymore. This wasn't just a small mistake. It was a betrayal of my trust, my finances, and my time. I told Zach that I couldn't continue with the relationship. I couldn't be with someone who wasn't upfront with me, especially when it came to something as important as money. I'd been there for him, helping him out when he needed it, and he had taken advantage of my generosity. I ended things with him right then and there. He tried to convince me that it wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be, but I knew I had to walk away. I wasn't going to let him drag me down with his lies and irresponsibility. I ended up paying off the loan myself. I didn't want the debt hanging over me, especially since I wasn't going to see any of the money he owed me. But I learned a valuable lesson about trusting people, about not letting my desire to help cloud my judgment. Zach wasn't the person I thought he was, and I should have seen the red flags earlier. I'll never make that mistake again. I met Emily at a party. It was one of those typical get-togethers where a few mutual friends invited a lot of people, and you don't really know who to expect. But Emily stood out immediately. She had this presence, this calm, confident demeanor that drew people in. She was sitting on the edge of the balcony, looking out over the city, sipping on a glass of wine. I figured I might as well go up and introduce myself. We hit it off instantly. She was smart, engaging, and had a way of making you feel like she really understood you. We spent most of the night talking, and by the end, I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She told me she was new to the city and was still figuring things out, and I found that relatable. I offered to show her around sometime, and she seemed genuinely excited about it. I was more than happy to offer her my time. There was just something about her that made me want to get to know her better. Over the next few weeks, we went out a few more times, grabbed lunch, went for walks in the park, had drinks. We were quickly becoming close, and I started to really like her. Emily had this vulnerability about her, this openness that made it easy to talk to her about anything. But as we grew closer, something started to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was an underlying tension in the way she would always ask about my life. Not just small talk. She was very interested in my career, my family, my finances. At first, I thought she was just curious. We were getting to know each other after all. But as time went on, I started to question how much of that curiosity was genuine. One night, Emily invited me over to her apartment for dinner. I showed up with a bottle of wine, and we had a great time cooking together, talking about our favorite foods, sharing stories. But as the night wore on, she started to get quiet. She seemed distant, almost like she was waiting for something. Eventually, she dropped it. She had been feeling sick for a while, and she was scared it might be something serious. She said she hadn't seen a doctor yet, but was planning on going the next day. I was concerned, but didn't want to press too hard, so I just offered to help in any way I could. The next week, she called me and told me the news. It was cancer. That's what she said. She told me that the doctors had confirmed it, and she was about to start treatment. I was in shock. I didn't know how to react. Part of me was devastated for her, and another part of me couldn't believe it. She had seemed so healthy, so full of life. And then there was the other part, the one that wondered why she hadn't mentioned anything earlier. But of course, I put those thoughts aside. I wanted to be there for her. I offered to help with whatever she needed, take her to appointments, help out with errands, anything. She was incredibly grateful, and I felt good doing it. We started spending more time together. I would pick her up for her treatments, take her out to dinner when she felt well enough, and just spend time with her whenever she needed me. Over the course of the next few months, I did everything I could to support her. I took time off work, rearranged my schedule, and made sure she had everything she needed. I was trying to be the best partner I could be, offering emotional support, being patient, being there when she needed someone. But there was a nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. I started noticing little things. One night, I went over to her place and noticed a few strange texts on her phone. She quickly locked it and acted like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was also the fact that she was always so calm about everything, way too calm. People who are going through something as serious as cancer are usually a little more emotional, a little more open about how they feel. But Emily was always cool, always composed, almost too composed. One day, I decided to dig a little deeper. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. I did some research in the hospital she said she was being treated at, just to confirm everything. When I looked up her doctor's name, nothing came up. I tried calling the office directly, and they didn't have her listed as a patient. At first, I thought it was a mistake, Maybe she had just given me the wrong name or something. But then I started to connect the dots. The vague details she'd given me about her diagnosis, a lack of visible signs of treatment, none of it added up. That's when I started looking at her social media accounts. Emily was always very careful about what she posted. Nothing too personal, just the occasional picture of a sunset or a meal she'd eaten. But there was one post that caught my eye. It was a photo of her at a party, smiling and surrounded by a group of people with a caption that said something about getting through this tough time with amazing friends. The photo was dated just a few days after she had told me about her supposed cancer diagnosis. I didn't know what to think at first. It didn't seem to add up. I decided to confront her. I texted her, asking if we could talk. When she showed up, I could tell something was off. She looked nervous, like she knew it was coming. I asked her straight out if she had really been sick, and at first she denied it. But when I kept pressing her, she finally admitted that she had lied. There was no cancer. There had never been cancer. She had made the whole thing up to get me to be more invested in her, to make me feel sorry for her. She told me that she had been struggling financially and emotionally, and had no idea how to keep me interested in her. She thought if she told me she was sick, I would stay around. It was manipulative and heartless. At that point, I was beyond furious. I didn't know how to react. I had been there for her, put so much of my life on hold for this supposed illness, and she had used me to get what she wanted. I didn't want to have any more contact with her after that. I told her to leave, and I never saw her again. I'm still in shock over it. I gave her everything. My time, my emotions, my support. And she threw it all away for a lie. It's hard to understand why someone would go that far. But I guess that's the thing about manipulation. It can make people do things they never thought possible. I wish I had known sooner. I wish I had seen the signs. But the truth is, when someone is willing to lie about something that big, there's not much you can do except walk away. I met Jake during a work conference a few years ago. It was one of those networking events where you spend a whole day listening to speakers, and then there's an after party where everyone gets a little more relaxed and starts to actually talk to each other. Jake stood out to me right away. He was confident, outgoing, and seemed to know everyone in the room. His easygoing charm and quick wit made him one of those people you couldn't help but gravitate toward. He made me laugh, and it didn't take long before we ended up hanging out the rest of the evening. We shared a couple of drinks and swapped stories about our jobs, our lives, and our ambitions. It was refreshing to meet someone who wasn't trying to impress people with titles or success. Jake had this down-to-earth vibe, and he seemed to genuinely care about people, which is a rare thing in my line of work. By the end of the night, I had his number, and we agreed to keep in touch. Over the next few months, we hung out a few times, grabbed dinner, went to the occasional bar. There was something easy and comfortable about being around him. But as I got to know him better, I began to notice some odd things about Jake that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't until we'd been hanging out for a while that he dropped the bombshell. One evening, we were sitting at a bar, and Jake turned to me and said, I've been dealing with some serious family stuff lately. I was surprised. Up until that point, I'd never heard him mention anything about his family, so I was curious. He went on to tell me that his mother was ill and needed surgery, something that was urgent and expensive. He explained that he didn't want to burden his family, so he had been looking for ways to raise the money without involving anyone else. I felt for him. I really did. I know what it's like to have a loved one go through health issues. I could see how much stress it was putting on him. Jake mentioned that he was doing everything he could to try and cover the costs on his own, but was struggling to get enough money together in time. After a few more drinks and more conversation, I decided to help him out. We were becoming close friends, right? I figured it was the right thing to do. So without really thinking twice, I offered to lend him a few $1,000s to help with the surgery. Jake was beyond grateful. He assured me he'd pay me back as soon as possible and that he'd find a way to get the money back to me. I trusted him. I really did. We had become close enough that it didn't feel like a big deal to me at the time. He seemed sincere, and I felt good about helping someone in need. The money wasn't a huge amount for me, and I believed it was going to a worthy cause. Weeks went by, and I didn't hear much from Jake about the surgery or the repayment. At first, I wasn't too concerned. I understood that he had a lot going on. But as time passed, I started to get more anxious. He'd occasionally send a text saying that things were moving along with the surgery, and he was still figuring everything out. But the updates started to get less frequent, and I started to wonder what was going on. Looking back, I wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. The way Jake was always vague about his life, the sudden urgency of his supposed family crisis. It was all too good to be true. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why he did it, but I learned a valuable lesson about trust. Sometimes people will go to extreme lengths to get what they want, even if it means deceiving those who care about them. And when you realize that, it's time to cut them loose and never look back. One day, I decided to reach out to him directly. I called him and he answered, but there was something off in his tone. He told me that the surgery had been postponed, that his mom had been doing better, and that there wasn't as much urgency anymore. I could tell something wasn't right. His voice didn't match the urgency of the situation, and there was an almost dismissive quality to the conversation. So I decided to do a little digging. At first, I was hesitant, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. I started asking around, checking on some things I'd never bothered to look into before. And that's when I found out. Jake's mom had been ill, but it wasn't anything life-threatening, and there certainly hadn't been any urgent surgery. In fact, she was perfectly fine. In fact, she hadn't needed any surgery at all. The whole story was a lie. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief wash over me. How could he do this? How could someone I considered a friend lie to me so convincingly? I kept asking myself over and over what kind of person would go to such lengths to manipulate someone into giving them money. I confronted Jake. I didn't give him the chance to explain himself, though. There was no need to. I just laid it all out, telling him I knew everything. I asked him what the hell was going on. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he was quiet for a long time before admitting it all. He told me he had made up the whole story because he needed the money. He didn't have any family issues. His mom was fine. He had been using the money for personal expenses, things he didn't want to admit to anyone, things like gambling. Jake wasn't just a liar, he was a manipulator. He had gotten close to me for the sole purpose of convincing me to lend him money, and I had fallen for it. He played on my sympathy and trust, and he got what he wanted. He tried to apologize, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. The anger and betrayal were too much. He had used my goodwill to take advantage of me, and now he expected me to just brush it off. But there was no way I could let that slide. I didn't just lose money. I lost a friend, someone I had trusted. I never saw Jake again after that. He tried to contact me a few times, sending texts and calling, but I ignored him. The way I saw it, anyone who would do something like that didn't deserve a second chance. I knew that if I allowed him back into my life, I'd only be opening myself up to more manipulation and deceit. Looking back, I wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. The way Jake was always vague about his life, the sudden urgency of his supposed family crisis. It was all too good to be true. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why he did it, but I learned a valuable lesson about trust. Sometimes people will go to extreme lengths to get what they want, even if it means deceiving those who care about them. And when you realize that, it's time to cut them loose and never look back. I met Ashley at a mutual friend's party. She seemed to be this breath of fresh air, always the life of the room, cracking jokes, and effortlessly making everyone feel comfortable. She had this charm about her, and when she smiled, it was like the whole room lit up. We got to talking, and before long, I found myself drawn to her. She had this energy that was contagious, and the more we talked, the more I wanted to learn about her. She told me about her past, how she'd been through a rough relationship, how her ex had been controlling and emotionally abusive. She said she had left him to start fresh to rebuild her life. I didn't know much about her ex, but I could tell how much it affected her. The more she opened up about it, the more I felt sorry for her. She had been through a lot, and I could see how vulnerable she was. She told me that it was hard to move on from something like that, and that she was just trying to get her life together. I was a good listener, and I could tell she appreciated it. After a few weeks of getting to know each other better, Ashley mentioned that her ex had been stalking her and that she didn't feel safe living in her apartment anymore. She told me that he had started showing up at her work, sending threatening messages, and showing up at her door at night. I could see the fear in her eyes as she spoke about it, and I knew that she was genuinely scared. At this point, I had started developing feelings for her. I knew she wasn't in a place to jump into anything serious, but I wanted to help her out. So when she asked if she could stay with me for a little while, I agreed. I had a 2-bedroom apartment, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Plus, I was starting to enjoy spending time with her, and I wanted to be there for her during this tough time. She moved in a week later and things started off okay. At first, she was quiet and kept to herself most of the time, understandably dealing with the trauma of what she had gone through. But as the days went on, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. There were strange phone calls and texts that she would quickly hide when I walked into the room. Sometimes she'd be on the phone for hours at a time, speaking in hushed tones, but I couldn't make out what was being said. One night, I came home early from work and found her sitting on the couch, talking to her ex. My heart sank when I saw the expression on her face. She didn't seem scared. In fact, she seemed almost comforted by the conversation. The phone call ended abruptly when she saw me standing in the doorway. She quickly put the phone down and tried to act normal, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. At first, I didn't say anything. I wanted to believe that maybe I had misunderstood the situation, but after a few more days of strange behavior, I began to get suspicious. I noticed she had started spending more and more time away from the apartment. She'd say she was running errands or meeting friends, but when I checked in with her, the details never quite lined up. She would also receive packages, but when I asked what they were, she'd quickly change the subject. I had a feeling that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I did something I wasn't proud of. One day, while she was out, I took a look through her things. I went through her bags and found a bunch of texts on her phone that weren't meant for my eyes. The messages were between Ashley and her ex. But what caught my attention wasn't just the fact that she was still in touch with him. It was the content of the messages. She was telling him that she was playing me, that was a temporary solution, while she figured things out. She even mentioned how she was scamming me into giving her a place to stay. The text went on to say that she was just pretending to be scared of him, playing up the victim act to make me feel sorry for her. There was no mention of any real danger, no concern about her well-being. In fact, it seemed like she was using her supposed abuse as a way to manipulate me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I felt sick to my stomach. The person I thought I was helping, the one I thought I was supporting, had been using me. She wasn't in danger at all. She had been playing me for weeks. I immediately confronted her when she came back home. She tried to deny it at first, but I didn't give her the chance. I showed her the texts, and for a moment she looked guilty. Then, in an instant, she became defensive. She said that I didn't understand the situation, and that it wasn't what it seemed. But it was exactly what it seemed. She had been using me to escape her own problems, all while pretending to be a victim. She wasn't just living in my apartment for safety. She was using me as a stepping stone to avoid her ex, and she was doing it at my expense. As she tried to justify her actions, I realized something even worse. She wasn't just lying to me. She was conning me. Her whole story was fabricated. Her ex wasn't some controlling, abusive monster. He wasn't stalking her or threatening her. In fact, it seemed like they had been in contact the entire time, and the more I thought about it, the more it became clear that they were in on it together. I kicked her out that night. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses. I was done. But she didn't take it well. She cried, begged me to understand, told me I was overreacting, but it didn't matter. The trust I had in her was gone, and I wasn't going to let her continue manipulating me. I'd given her a place to stay out of kindness, and she had repaid me by using my generosity against me. A few days later, I ran into one of her friends at a coffee shop. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, but they started talking about Ashley. Apparently, Ashley's ex wasn't just some abusive guy. They had been in an on-again, off-again relationship for years, and the truth was that they were trying to get back together. Ashley had been using me to cover her tracks, to make sure no one knew what was really going on. She hadn't needed a place to stay. She'd just been trying to keep up the illusion of her victimhood so she could stay in my apartment long enough to work things out with him. I was livid. She had used me, lied to me, and manipulated my sympathy. The whole thing had been a scheme from the start. And in the end, I was left with nothing but a feeling of betrayal. Looking back, I wish I had seen the red flags sooner. But she was good, too good. She knew exactly how to play the victim, how to make me feel like I was doing the right thing by helping her. But in the end, it wasn't about helping her. It was about her using me as a pawn in her own messed up game. I never spoke to her again after that night, and I never will. I was never one to be easily swayed by the stories people told me, but when I met Dylan, something about him felt different. Maybe it was the way he spoke about his dreams of going back to school, or how passionate he seemed when he explained that he just needed a little help with tuition. I was drawn to his ambition, his desire to turn things around, and I admired his honesty. At least that's how it seemed. We met through a mutual friend who had known Dylan for years. He was always talking about how great of a guy Dylan was, how he'd been through some tough breaks but was determined to make something of himself. So when he started talking to me about needing help for school, I felt compelled to help. He wasn't asking for much, just enough to get through a semester. He even showed me his acceptance letter, which seemed legitimate enough. Dylan explained that his parents couldn't afford to help him out anymore, and he didn't want to go into debt with student loans. He was saving what he could, but he needed a little extra push. I wasn't rolling in cash, but I had just gotten a bonus at work, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Plus, he was genuinely grateful, and I could tell he didn't want to be a burden. After a few weeks of talking, I decided to offer him the money. It wasn't a huge sum, but enough to cover a semester's worth of tuition. Dylan swore up and down that he'd pay me back as soon as he could. We even signed a little agreement just to make it official. The first couple of months were fine. I'd check in with him now and then just to make sure things were going smoothly. Dylan would send me updates about his classes, and he'd tell me about the people he was meeting on campus. He seemed happy, even though he was working part-time to make ends meet. I never once questioned his story. After all, he had been nothing but respectful and sincere. But slowly, I began to notice little things that didn't quite add up. He'd cancel plans with me more often, claiming that schoolwork had piled up, but I started to get suspicious when I saw him out at bars with friends on social media. I hadn't expected him to be a hermit, but the sudden shift from studying all the time to partying every weekend made me wonder if he was being honest about his priorities. Then things started to unravel. One evening, I was visiting him at his apartment, and I noticed a letter on the counter. It was from a financial aid office, but the name on the envelope wasn't Dylan's. I tried not to act too curious, but I couldn't help myself. I picked it up and saw that it was addressed to someone named Jeffrey, and the letter clearly mentioned a student loan approval. My heart sank. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something was off. I confronted Dylan the next day. He looked a little surprised when I brought it up, but he brushed it off quickly, saying it was a mistake or maybe a piece of junk mail. He apologized and assured me that he had everything under control, but I wasn't convinced. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't ignore it. I decided to dig a little deeper. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other things. I went into his apartment once when he wasn't home, just to see if I could find any more clues. That's when I saw something that confirmed my worst suspicions. Dylan had been using my money for other things, things that had nothing to do with school. There were receipts for luxury items, a new phone, and even a weekend trip to a fancy resort, all of which he had put on his credit card. But the real kicker came when I found the student loan approval letter for his full tuition. It turned out Dylan had never needed my money at all. The anger hit me like a wave. I had been duped. Dylan wasn't using my money for tuition or to better his life. He had been playing me the entire time. I started to piece everything together, the late-night parties, the vacations, the shopping sprees. All of it had been funded with the money I gave him. I wasn't just a generous friend or a helping hand. I was his personal ATM. I confronted him later that evening, and he immediately tried to deny everything. He told me I was overreacting and that I didn't understand how hard it was to balance school and life. But I wasn't buying it anymore. He had lied to me from the start, and now it was all coming to light. Dylan tried to shift the blame, saying that he had used my money because he deserved it after all he'd been through. He even tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was being selfish for questioning his actions. It took every ounce of self-control not to lose it. I asked him about the student loans, the receipts, and the vacations, and at first he tried to deny it, but eventually he admitted that he had been lying about his situation. He didn't need the tuition money, and he had been using my help to fund his lifestyle. But what struck me the most was how calm he was about it. There was no remorse in his voice, no apology, just a cold sense of entitlement. He went on to tell me how he planned to pay me back eventually, but in the meantime, he was living his best life. The words stung, but I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. I had been so blinded by his charm and the idea of helping someone in need that I hadn't seen what was really happening. Dylan wasn't a struggling student trying to make ends meet. He was a con artist who saw me as an easy target. I told him I wanted the money back. He promised he'd pay me in installments, but I knew better than to believe him. By then, I had already started contacting the bank to dispute the charges he had made with my money. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making sure he didn't get away with it. He had used me, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. A few weeks went by with no word from Dylan, and I eventually had to get a lawyer involved to make sure I was compensated. When I finally reached him again, he tried to act like nothing had happened. He even tried to get me to forgive him, claiming he'd been going through a rough time and didn't know how to handle everything. But it didn't matter. He had crossed the line. I learned a lot from the situation. First and foremost, I realized that some people will do anything to take advantage of others. Dylan had no shame, no hesitation in using me to get what he wanted. And the worst part, he never thought he would get caught. I got my money back, but I still had to deal with the emotional fallout. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of betrayal, the trust that had been shattered. I had been fooled by someone who was nothing more than a manipulator. Dylan tried to reach out to me months later, asking if we could start over and be friends again, but I knew better. Once someone shows you who they really are, there's no going back. And as far as I was concerned, Dylan was dead to me. When I first met Chloe, she was the definition of charm. A little bit mysterious, a little bit quirky, and absolutely stunning. She had this way of making everyone feel special, like you were the only person in the room who mattered. She told me about her dreams, her hopes, her passions. The more I got to know her, the more I wanted to be part of her world. We started dating after a few months of casual hangouts. At first, things felt easy. We laughed together, went on spontaneous trips, and shared secrets late into the night. Chloe seemed to be the perfect person, confident, independent, but also vulnerable in just the right ways to make you feel like you needed to protect her. She had always been upfront about wanting to build something serious, and that was something I was on board with. I'd never really thought much about her financial situation. Chloe was a talented artist, and while I knew she wasn't exactly rolling in money, she always spoke about how she was building her career and figuring things out. At the time, I didn't mind. I had a stable job, and I figured we were both doing our best to navigate life's ups and downs. The first red flag came when she asked me to put her name on my business account. She told me it was just in case of emergencies, and I trusted her enough to agree. It felt like a reasonable request at the time. After all, we were a team. She reassured me that it wouldn't be a big deal and that we were building something together. A few weeks passed, and I didn't think much of it. She never mentioned anything about using the account. I was busy with work. But one night, I logged into my bank account to check something, and my stomach sank when I saw the balance. It wasn't a huge amount that was missing, but there was a transaction I didn't recognize. It was a transfer to an account that wasn't mine, and when I checked the details, I saw Chloe's name attached to the transaction. At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe there was an explanation. But as I dug deeper, I saw more and more transfers, some for smaller amounts, others for larger sums. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Chloe had been quietly draining my account, taking money whenever she felt the need. My heart dropped into my stomach. The trust I had in her was shattering, and I couldn't understand how she could do something like this. I confronted her the next day, trying to keep my cool. When I asked her about the money transfers, Chloe didn't immediately deny it. She looked shocked, maybe even a little scared, but she didn't admit to anything either. Instead, she told me I was overreacting and that it was all just a misunderstanding. She promised that she'd transfer the money back and that it wouldn't happen again. But I could tell the way she was acting that something wasn't right. She wasn't even sorry. She was more concerned about getting caught. Over the next few days, I started to notice other things that seemed off. Chloe was always more distant than usual, less affectionate. She'd spend hours on the phone, but whenever I asked who she was talking to, she'd give vague answers. I could tell she was hiding something, but I wasn't sure what it was. I did some more digging, looking at her social media accounts, and it didn't take long before I saw a post from a few months back that made my heart race. There she was in a luxury car with a man I didn't recognize, looking as cozy as ever. I zoomed in on the caption. Big things ahead, hashtag future plans. That wasn't the worst part, though. The worst part was the hashtag. The man she was with was clearly not just a friend. They were close, too close. I felt a sickening feeling in my gut, but I didn't want to believe it. I confronted her about it that night. Chloe's face went pale, and for the first time she seemed genuinely caught off guard. She tried to explain it away, saying it was just a throwback, and that the guy in the picture was just a friend. But I could see the panic in her eyes. She was lying, and she knew it. The more I pressed her, the more she crumbled. It turned out that the man in the picture wasn't just a friend. He was an ex-boyfriend. But what really hurt was the way she had been using him and others to get money. The guy in the car wasn't some random rich dude she happened to know. He was someone she had been seeing off and on while we were dating. She'd been juggling both of us, taking what she could from each of us, all while keeping up the charade that she was just a poor, struggling artist. The worst part? Chloe wasn't even embarrassed. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was mad that I had found out. Her defense was that she needed the money, that she had nothing to lose and had to do what she had to do. She didn't care that she had stolen from me, emotionally and financially. All she cared about was how her little plan had been disrupted. I didn't know what to do. I felt betrayed and humiliated, but I couldn't let her get away with it. I was done playing her game. I asked her to leave, and she didn't argue. She didn't even try to make things right. Chloe just packed her things and walked out of my life as easily as she had walked in. I was angry, frustrated, and hurt. How had I let someone like her into my life? How had I been so blind? Chloe had played me from the start, manipulating my emotions and taking advantage of my trust. The money wasn't even the worst part. It was the way she had completely disregarded me as a person. It took a while, but I eventually got over it. I reported the unauthorized transfers to my bank and got some of the money back. But the emotional damage lingered. It took time to heal, but it taught me a valuable lesson. No matter how charming someone may be, actions always speak louder than words. And I wasn't going to let anyone play me like that again. Chloe never tried to contact me after she left. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved on to another guy, one with deeper pockets than mine. But I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, she was part of my past, and I had no interest in revisiting that chapter. The whole experience was a wake-up call. It made me realize that sometimes people will do anything to get what they want, even if it means using others. Chloe had used me, but in the end, she was the one who lost. I met Liam at a mutual friend's wedding. He was the kind of guy who immediately made an impression, not because he was loud or obnoxious, but because he had this understated confidence about him. He wasn't trying too hard to stand out, he just did. He had this smile that made you feel like he knew something you didn't. I was drawn to him right away, and it didn't take long for us to start talking. We hit it off instantly. He was easy to talk to, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Over the next couple of months, we spent more time together. We went on dinner dates, saw movies, and hung out with friends. Everything felt easy. Liam wasn't like anyone I had dated before. He had this charm that was hard to resist. He was thoughtful, considerate, and always made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. But it wasn't long before I realized that Liam was more interested in one thing, my family. At first, I thought he was just being polite. He'd ask about my parents, my siblings, and even about my extended family. He'd often mention how he loved getting to know the people who were important to me. But as time went on, his questions started to feel more calculated. He wanted to know about my aunt in particular, the one who had recently come into a considerable inheritance. At first, I brushed it off. It wasn't unusual for people to ask about family dynamics, especially if they were genuinely interested in you. But Liam's interest seemed to go beyond that. He would ask about my aunt's lifestyle, where she lived, what she did for a living, and even about her financial situation. He wanted to know how much she was worth, whether she had plans for the future, and if she had made any big purchases lately. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just curious. But when he started casually mentioning that my aunt was well off and had to be doing something right, it started to feel off. Still, I couldn't put my finger on what bothered me. I had been with Liam for months, and he had always been nothing but kind and respectful to me. But something about his fascination with my aunt felt wrong. One evening, we were having dinner at my place. We were talking about future plans, and out of nowhere, Liam asked if I had ever thought about how my family would handle things if something happened to them. How the inheritance would be divided, whether I'd be left with anything, or if I'd have to fight for what was mine. His tone was casual, almost like he was making small talk, but it struck me as odd. It was the first time he'd mentioned inheritance directly. I brushed it off as just a weird conversation, but it stayed with me. I started paying closer attention to his behavior around my family. He would show up early to family gatherings, asking about how things were going with my aunt, always trying to get more details about her life. It wasn't long before I began to notice a shift in his attitude. One day, I found out that Liam had started seeing my aunt. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some kind of misunderstanding. But then I found text messages between the two of them, and the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Liam wasn't just interested in my aunt for the sake of getting to know my family. He had been using me to get closer to her. He was dating her, pretending to care about me, all the while getting in good with my aunt for one simple reason: her money. I felt sick to my stomach. How had I not seen it? The signs had been there all along. His questions, his charm, his sudden interest in my aunt's life. But I had been blinded by his attention, or the way he made me feel important, the way he made me feel like we were building something together. I had been a pawn in his game all along. When I confronted Liam, he didn't even try to deny it. He admitted everything. He told me that he had been dating my aunt for the past month, and that he had only been with me to gain access to her. He said that my aunt was the key to his future, and that he had been using me as a stepping stone to get closer to her. He was transparent in a way that was almost frightening, as if he truly believed that everything he had done was justified. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just that Liam had lied to me. It was that he had used me, manipulated me, and treated me like a fool. He had played me against my own family, and I hadn't even seen it coming. I thought he cared about me, but it turned out that all he cared about was what my aunt could offer him. I was furious, devastated, and hurt all at once. I thought about everything we had been through, the dates, the late-night talks, the plans we'd made for the future, and it all felt like a joke. I had been so sure that I was in a healthy relationship, that I found someone who truly cared about me. But it had all been a lie at a carefully constructed facade designed to get what he wanted. When I told my aunt what had happened, she was just as shocked as I was. She had no idea that Liam was using her, and the realization hit her hard. She had trusted him, and he had played both of us for fools. We both felt completely blindsided by his actions. It was clear that he had been manipulating everyone in his path to get what he wanted. After everything went down, I had to take a step back and reassess everything. I was angry at myself for being so blind, for letting someone like Liam into my life. But I also had to remind myself that it wasn't my fault. I hadn't been the one to manipulate the situation. It wasn't my fault that someone had taken advantage of my trust. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on. It wasn't easy. I was hurt, angry, and disillusioned. I had learned a painful lesson about trust, and I was determined not to make the same mistake again. I started focusing on myself, on my own happiness and well-being. I distanced myself from Liam, and I stopped seeing my aunt as a way to make him jealous or feel like I still had some control over the situation. Liam's true colors had shown, and I had been lucky enough to see through his mask before he could do any more damage. I had my family, my friends, and my own dignity intact. Liam had lost everything in the end: his access to my family, my trust, and his chance at a relationship with someone who actually cared about him. He had played his cards wrong, and now he had nothing left. I had met Olivia at a party one summer evening, the kind of party where everyone's just a little tipsy, the music's a little too loud, and it feels like everyone's trying to make a connection with someone. I didn't expect much to come of it, but Olivia was different. She wasn't like the other girls at the party, who were more interested in making sure their Instagram stories looked perfect or getting attention from the crowd. Olivia was quiet yet confident in a way that pulled me in. Her eyes were warm, and her smile made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We hit it off instantly, and after the party, we started texting. Our relationship grew quickly. We went on dates, laughed at bad jokes, shared stories, and before I knew it, we were spending a lot of time together. Everything seemed perfect. We connected on a deeper level, emotionally, physically, and mentally. It felt right. She seemed like the kind of person I could see myself with long term. But there was one thing that made me uneasy. Olivia would often drop hints about her financial struggles. She'd say things like, "I can't afford this right now," or "money's been tight lately." At first, I thought it was just a casual comment, but it started becoming a pattern. Every time we went out, she'd order something expensive, but then look at the bill and make an excuse about not having enough cash. She'd smile sheepishly and say she'd pay me back later, which of course never happened. I didn't mind it at first. I was making good money, and I thought maybe she was just going through a rough patch. I helped her out a few times, offering to pay for dinners or splitting bills. She was always so grateful, and I figured she just needed a little help. But things started to escalate. She began asking me to pay for more and more things: groceries, her medical bills, even her phone bill. The excuses were always the same: I don't have the money right now, or I'll pay you back as soon as I can. It wasn't until a few months in that I began to realize something was off. Olivia started getting more comfortable with asking for larger sums of money. One night, we were hanging out, and she casually mentioned that she needed to go to the doctor but didn't have enough to cover the visit. I agreed to pay for it, thinking nothing of it. But then she asked me to pay for her medications too, which added up to a few $100. By then, it was starting to feel like she was depending on me for her every financial need. I began to question if I was being taken advantage of. That was when things started to unravel. A week later, I bumped into one of her old friends, someone she hadn't mentioned in the time we'd been seeing each other. The conversation started off innocent enough, but when I asked about Olivia, her friend looked at me strangely. "Oh, you're the guy," she said, as though something didn't sit right. I frowned, not understanding what she meant. The friend then asked if I knew about Olivia's financial situation, and that's when the bomb dropped. Apparently, Olivia wasn't struggling as much as she had led me to believe. In fact, she got a well-paying job that she had kept secret from me, making a six-figure salary. Her family was wealthy, and she had an inheritance that she was sitting on, but she didn't want anyone to know. She had played me for a fool, pretending to be financially destitute, all while using me to cover her expenses. The friend explained that Olivia had done this before with other guys, constantly asking for money and pretending like she couldn't afford anything, all the while secretly being financially stable. I was stunned. It didn't make sense. I couldn't believe it. All those times she had struggled with money, all the times she made me feel sorry for her, none of it had been real. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to face the truth. Olivia had been using me for my money, making me feel like I was helping her out of kindness when in reality she had no intention of paying me back. She had manipulated me into thinking she was in need so that I keep handing over money without question. I confronted her the next day. The look on her face when I mentioned what I had learned was one I'll never forget. It was like a mask slipping away, revealing the true person underneath. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she told me that she had never really wanted to be in a relationship with me. She had liked the idea of someone taking care of her, of having someone to rely on financially without ever having to lift a finger. She had been playing a long con, and I had been the sucker. When I demanded to know why she had kept up the lie for so long, she shrugged and said it was just easier that way. "You're a nice guy," she said, "and it wasn't hard to make you feel bad for me. I figured if I played the poor, struggling girl, you'd always be there to pick up the slack." She even admitted that she had done this with multiple guys in the past and had never had to worry about paying anyone back because they were always so eager to help her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The emotional manipulation was almost impressive, but it didn't make it any less hurtful. I felt so stupid for not seeing the signs sooner. All those times I thought I was being a supportive partner, when really I was just a bank account to her. I was furious, hurt, and embarrassed, but mostly I was disappointed in myself for letting it go on for as long as I did. After that, I stopped responding to Olivia's messages. She tried calling, texting, and even showed up at my apartment once, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. But I knew it was all just part of her game. She wanted to make me feel guilty, make me believe that I had somehow wronged her by finding out the truth. She even tried to claim that she loved me, but I wasn't buying it. Her love had always been conditional, dependent on how much I could give her. It took me a while to truly move on. The emotional toll of being manipulated like that was hard to shake. I had trusted Olivia, and she had taken advantage of that trust. But over time, I learned to let go of the guilt she had placed on me and started focusing on my own life again. I couldn't let someone like her control my happiness or my finances. Olivia had shown me exactly who she was, and I wasn't going to waste any more time or energy on someone who didn't value me or the truth. Looking back, I realized that her manipulation was subtle at first, but the moment I started asking questions, everything fell apart. Olivia had thought she could keep playing the same game forever, but once the truth came out, she lost everything. The trust I had in her was shattered, and there was no way to rebuild it. I was just another person she had used, another person she had convinced herself was there to cater to her needs, but not anymore. I met Ben at a family gathering. He was my cousin's new boyfriend, and everyone seemed to like him right away. He was charming, easygoing, and could carry on a conversation with just about anyone in the room. I remember thinking, okay, this guy's cool, and I didn't think much beyond that. Over the course of the next few months, Ben became more and more involved in family events. He came to birthdays, holiday dinners, and even some random get-togethers. He'd always be there, chatting with my parents, laughing with my aunt, and joining in on everything without ever seeming out of place. At first, I didn't think it was strange at all. He was dating my cousin after all, so it made sense he'd be around. But as time went on, I began noticing little things that didn't sit right with me. It started with his weird attention toward my aunt. My aunt was in her late 40s, single, and had always been a bit of a mystery to us. She kept to herself, had a good job, and was well off financially. I hadn't thought much about it until I saw the way Ben looked at her. It wasn't just a casual conversation you'd expect at a family gathering. It was different, more like he was trying to impress her, trying to get her attention in a way that felt more intentional and casual. At first, I told myself I was just overthinking things, but it kept happening. Every family event, Ben would stick close to my aunt, make sure she had everything she needed, and always seemed to be in her space more than anyone else's. It wasn't just me who noticed either. My sister pointed it out one day when we were talking about Ben. He's always hovering around Aunt Carla, don't you think? She said. It's kind of weird. I didn't know how to respond at first. After all, it was just a weird vibe, right? Maybe I was imagining things. But the more I observed, the more I began to see patterns. At a barbecue one afternoon, I saw Ben laughing with my aunt about something I couldn't quite hear, and when I walked past them, I swear I caught him whispering something in her ear that made her smile in a way I'd never seen before. I brushed it off at the time, but it lingered in the back of my mind. As months passed, Ben and my cousin seemed to be getting more serious. They started traveling together, posting pictures online, and all that normal relationship stuff. But even as things seemed to be progressing with them, Ben's behavior toward my aunt never changed. If anything, it got worse. He started showing up at her place more often, even when my cousin wasn't around. He would text her, call her, and offer to help with things at her house, all in this way that made it clear he wasn't just being a friendly guy. He was trying to get something from her. I started to feel uncomfortable, like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I never said anything to my cousin about it, mostly because I didn't want to stir things up or seem paranoid. But deep down, I had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. The breaking point came one evening when I was visiting my cousin's place. Ben and my cousin had just returned from a weekend trip, and they were all excited to show me the photos. But as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. My aunt was there too. She had been at their apartment, and she was standing awkwardly by the window, clutching her purse, like she was waiting for something or someone. My cousin seemed distracted, busy talking to Ben, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling that something was going on. I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried to engage in conversation, the more I realized that my aunt was acting off. She was more fidgety than usual, and she kept glancing at Ben like she was making sure he wasn't watching her. When I finally got her alone in the kitchen, I asked if everything was okay. Her response was brief, but her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired, she said, a little too quickly. It wasn't until later that evening, when Ben had left to grab some food, that my aunt finally pulled me aside. She asked me to sit down with her, and the tone in her voice immediately told me this wasn't just a casual chat. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Something about Ben, something I didn't want anyone to know. My heart started pounding in my chest as I listened closely. He's been coming around more often lately, and it's not just because he's with your cousin. She trailed off, trying to find the right words. I could tell it was difficult for her, like this wasn't easy to talk about. My mind was racing, but I tried to stay calm. What's going on, Aunt Carla? You can tell me. She hesitated before finally admitting the truth. Ben wasn't just interested in her company. He had been secretly dating her for months. He's been lying to your cousin this whole time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's using me to get closer to the family. He's pretending to be this great guy, but all he wants is to get close to your cousin's inheritance. My stomach dropped. I was floored. I had known something was off, but I hadn't expected this. I felt betrayed, angry, and completely blindsided. Apparently, Ben had been secretly pursuing my aunt, all while maintaining his relationship with my cousin. He had been trying to get her to trust him, confide in him, and eventually convince her to include him in her will. The idea was simple: marry her, inherit everything when she passed, and then walk away with a fortune. It was sickening to think that Ben had been manipulating everyone around him just to get his hands on money. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but my aunt stopped me. If you say anything to anyone, he'll twist it around and say I'm crazy. He's good at that. He's been doing it for a long time. Please don't tell your cousin just yet. I need to figure out how to handle this. But I couldn't stay silent. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep Ben's manipulation went. He had been using me, my cousin, and my aunt as pawns in his scheme. It made my blood boil. How could he do this to the people I cared about? How could he lie to my cousin like this? I didn't wait long to take action. I called my cousin and asked her to meet up, telling her that I had something important to talk about. When we sat down, I told her everything. It was hard to break it to her. She was devastated, and I could see her world falling apart as the truth hit her. She didn't want to believe it at first, but when I lay out all the details, she couldn't deny it. Ben had been playing us all for fools. He had been lying to her, to me, and to my aunt, all for his own gain. That night, everything changed. My cousin confronted Ben, and he tried to deny everything, but the lies were too obvious. My aunt, standing by my side, confirmed everything. Ben didn't stand a chance. My cousin broke up with him right there and then, and he was kicked out of the apartment. As for me, I was just glad it was over. I never imagined someone could be so calculating, so cold. But Ben had shown his true colors, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I realized that sometimes even the people closest to you aren't who you think they are. And that's a lesson I'll never forget.